1v1 tournaments. They are the most common type of tournament, and in my opinion the easiest type to get consistent gold from. It's a great way to improve your individual skills or to save up for a premium account or tanks, and it happens to be my favorite way of getting gold quickly. However, winning against other players in 1 versus 1 can be exceptionally difficult, especially when your opponent is a good player. Because of this video will have to be a bit longer and more complex than my typical one. In exchange, I hope that even the best of players out there will learn something new from this video. To fully understand everything in this video, I recommend that you have several thousand battles under your belt already, as I will not be explaining mechanics and more specific things like that. I'll be dividing this video up into 4 different parts. First will be tank selection, where I'll list the various tanks at each tier that'll be best. I'll also explain why you want to pick these types of tanks. Second section is basic tactics, where I'll be going over the things to keep in mind throughout a battle and the overall plan you need to have to win. Third is a guide to capping or resetting correctly, which is a very frequent occurrence in 1v1 tournaments, and in the 4th section I'll go over fighting opponents in close quarters. Finally, I'll be giving some replay examples of all of these strategies in practice. If you are bored in a section, feel free to skip ahead, but keep in mind that I will be referring to earlier sections throughout the video. And now we begin. Tank selection. 1v1 tournaments require tanks that are able to consistently outtrade enemy vehicles. This does not necessarily mean bring a dueling heavy tank, because there are a bunch of different ways to outtrade your opponent. You can win in a light tank. You can theoretically win in artillery. I've never done so. I've come close in the left as a joke. As for more serious loadouts, you can bring a lighter medium if you are able to put in shots without getting hit in return. You can bring something with high amounts of armor to block enemy fire and remain invincible. You can bring a tank that can simply crush its opponent with sheer damage per minute. But a combination of these factors in one form or the other is the best of all the options. In my opinion, heavier vehicles with high damage per minute are by far the easiest vehicles to bring, as you can respond to whatever the enemy brings. Also, you usually want to bring a vehicle that in a certain position is entirely impenetrable. For example, let's look at the KV-4. I know it's not a great tank, but that's why it's the example. It has great overall armor, and a gun that can decently hold its own. However, there are very few positions it can take and be entirely invincible, meaning that if the enemy team fires gold, you're gonna get penned. This is probably the best position you'd be able to get in the KV-4, and yet it can still be penetrated in these spots here. Now, to contrast, let's look at a tank like the Carnarvon Action 10. If you are able to place yourself on a ridgeline looking down at an opponent, you will be either impossible or incredibly difficult to penetrate. The Carnarvon, the non-premium variant, is actually even better at this, as it has no cupola whatsoever. The aspect of being impenetrable is important, as it's one of the easiest ways to outtrade your opponent. If you are doing more damage to them than they are doing to you, you are winning, obviously. The Carnarvons also meet other requirements. They have a fairly high health pool, they have high damage per minute, and they're agile enough to not get outmaneuvered. And they also have gun depression for flexibility. Another potential aspect to look at is tanks that are able to obliterate opponents by forcing them to fight you in damage terms. For example, a Progetto has no armor whatsoever, but it is able to put out single shots into its opponents repeatedly before spending its entire clip finishing the opponent off. This effectively gives you a bonus on finisher DPM as an auto-reloader, as after the single opponent is dead, you don't have to worry about how many shells you have left. Because of this, auto-reloaders and auto-loaders are another tempting option for tournaments, but keep in mind that if the enemy brings a Carnarvon and goes hull down, you can't kill it. And if they sit on the cap circle, they'll force you to them, but that's a later topic. So, to summarize, you want tanks that are able to reach the capture circle in a timely manner and are not at a high risk to getting incredibly outmaneuvered by enemy light vehicles. So, no VK101P or TS5s. You then want a tank that has high damage per minute and can consistently outtrade opponents, usually meaning high penetration. And finally, if possible, you want a tank that is either entirely impenetrable in the correct situation or can force the opponent into losing a fight with damage per minute. Your equipment should echo these goals. Improved hardening and gun rammers are priorities. I won't go over a list of literally every good tank in the game, especially because it depends on the map. You want more gun depression on hill maps and more mobility on larger maps, etc. But I will go over a few of the good ones from each tier. There are other ones which you can find from studying the different aspects I described in this section, but here are my favorites. So from tier 1 to tier 3, it doesn't really matter. It's very rare that you actually have to fight tournaments on this tier. The only thing you really have to be worried about is that there are some tanks at tier 1, 2, and 3 that physically cannot penetrate other tanks that are at tiers 1, 2, and 3. Try to avoid those. For example, bringing the T2 Light at tier 2 is actually a pretty high risk, because if the enemy brings like the Mini Mouse or some other French light tank that literally has invincible armor from the front, you're gonna die. Tier 4 is a lot of the same thing, not really anything too complex. The Matilda is a fan favorite, so is the Lux, even though it was nerfed. The T80's actually got surprisingly good armor. The B1 and the B2 has good DPM. P2640 is surprisingly good just because it has amazing HE shells. Tier 5, same exact situation, bunch of DPM and health tanks. Tier 6 is where it starts to get a little bit complicated because you actually have some differences in vehicles. The T-150 is quite good. I like using the small gun to have that rapid fire, and by I mean other people, because I usually just bring the 85M, I'm cheap. But the VK3601H is another really good one. Just put hardening on that tank, and then it's very difficult for the enemy to kill you. That's one of those tanks where you just want to YOLO the enemy and shoot more than they do. Tier 7 has some really good ones. T29 is always a classic. I use the IS-2 because I'm cheap and I don't want to buy any other heavies. It works well enough. We'll talk about that later though. Tier 8 is where it starts to get really interesting. You can bring a ton of different stuff for this tier. It's really important that you try to bring something that you're confident in. I'm not going to go into why all these are good picks. I'm sure you can figure it out. For Tier 9, pretty much the same thing. There are some tanks at Tier 9 that are really good at everything. For example, the Kampfpanzer 50T, the Concept 1B, and the TNH version 51 are fantastic for this because they will be able to deal with pretty much everything. At Tier 10, S-Conk is really good. I know that Chieftain's on the list and so is the 279E. They are not actually the best tanks for this, and I'll be talking about that a little bit later, but just keep in mind that in a fair fight, which is what 1v1s are, if you go to the same spot of the map with an S-Conk and a Chieftain, the S-Conk will win a fight against the Chieftain every time. Same thing with the 430U, very good at fighting 1v1s. A lot of people try bringing IS-7s. They're not good at this, because if you face hug in an IS-7, you're gonna get penetrated. But again, we'll talk about that later. So, without further ado, let's start with basic tactics. As soon as you start the battle, two things you need to be aware of. One, what tank you're in and the map that you're on, how it relates, and then the tank that your opponent is in. You want to figure out where you want to go first. For example, if you're in a heavier vehicle, then you want to get to a hold down location where you can start trading effectively, and you always want to go near the cap circle because that is where all of the battles will happen. You have to go play near the cap circle. The cap will happen if you are not there. After that, you have to figure out where your opponent's going to want to go in their tank. And keep in mind, they're thinking the exact same stuff as you. You are trying to figure out how to counter their tank with yours. They're going to be trying to figure out how to counter your tank with theirs. Lower level players will often not even look at what you bring and go to the same spot every time. Those are the ones that are really easy to beat because you can figure out a way to counter them by going to a different spot than you would normally go to. For example, if the enemy tank is a heavy tank and you're also in a heavy tank, instead of actually going to your normal hold down, maybe you should go to where you think they're going to be hold down from the side. If your opponent's ideal position, which is what they're thinking about, is a real challenge for your vehicle, you want to put all of your efforts into countering that position or trying to play at an angle where that position won't be a problem for you. Alright, so now we get into the complicated part where we talk about the three main types of fights. The first type of fight is where the enemy tank will be faster than you. If the enemy tank is faster than you, your tank should be able to win a fight in a 1v1 directly. What I mean by that is that in close quarters, your tank should win if you are slower than the enemy. If your tank can't do that, then you're in the wrong tank. Anyway, if the enemy tank is faster than you and you can win in a 1v1 in close quarters, you want to make sure that you're forcing the opponent into a close quarters combat with you. Normally, if the enemy tank is faster, then you are going to be in a heavier vehicle. You want to get yourself to the cap circle as quickly as possible without getting caught out before you get there. Once you get to the cap circle, you want to figure out if you can actually stay on the cap circle while baiting the opponent into coming at you. There are some maps that this works better on than others. For example, on Muravanka, if you are playing on the cap circle, the enemy, medium or light, can go any which way to be able to reset you. It's very much in the open. But on other maps like Ruinberg or on Lakeville, then you can really limit the amount of spaces that the enemy tank can come at you from, and then as soon as they get close enough to get a reset, then you charge them and make sure that they can't escape. You want to make sure that you're forcing them into that close combat. Now we talk about when the enemy is actually slower than you. If the enemy is slower than you, that means that the opposite is usually true. The enemy will probably be able to win in a 1v1 at close quarters against you. So what you want to do is do the opposite of what we just talked about. You want to make sure that you don't get forced into that close quarters combat. You want to keep away from the frontal attack. The enemy probably has more armor than you, so try not to go to a front. Pop up from unexpected positions, especially early in the game. So for example, when your enemy is lumbering towards the direction that they have to start from, and remember, all players will always go to the cap circle because you have to for these, you can come at it from a different angle. Like, you can still beat them to the cap circle by going a longer way than the enemy at a slow pace will get there going straight. Also, it's very important when you are lower on armor and faster than your opponent, do not let the enemy shoot you for free. It is so important that you are winning all of the trades. Alright, and then the final type of fight is when the enemy has the exact same speed as you, or similar speeds with you. If the enemy is in a heavy tank and you're in a heavy tank and you guys are in similar heavy tanks, then it's usually a very straightforward fight. You guys will probably go to the same spot that is a hold down spot and trade against each other. If your tank is in a tank that you picked for its invincibility, for example, if you're in a Carnarvon at tier 8 and they don't have enough pen to pen your turret, just sit in front of them. Doesn't matter. For heavy tank fights, it's very important that you get yourself into an impenetrable position while keeping your opponent from getting in one. That's kind of the moral of heavy tank fights. If you're in an impenetrable position and your opponent is not in one, you win. If you are in a tank that can just barely win a flat-out trade against the opponent, then do that anyway. For example, if you look at this clip, I'm in a Concept 1B, the enemy's in an Object 777. While I started off the game by getting pretty unlucky with my trades, I knew for a fact that overall my gun was going to be able to penetrate him more consistently than he will penetrate me, so I was totally fine with just sitting in front of him for a long period of time. Alright, so those are the main 3 types of fights. Now, for the overall positioning that you want to keep in mind throughout all of these is that when I tell you to get into an advantageous position, there's usually a very consistent type of position that you want. The high ground is so important. If you give your opponent height against you, then you are giving them the control of the battle entirely. Whoever's on top is able to control whether or not they engage because they have more speed going downhill than you do uphill. They're able to set the terms of gun depression. They're able to disengage when they want to a hell of a lot more easily than you can. There's a ton of advantages for going higher up in the battlefield. Even if you don't have gun depression, it's usually a good idea to start from above and then work your way down. 1v1s will constantly follow a single pattern. That pattern is going to be both players play against each other until one of them is able to decisively win at close quarter combat. As soon as that happens, that player that is confident in winning will have to safely narrow the gap in between the 2 tanks and then take out the enemy tank while they're in close quarters combat. So there are 2 stages. 1, you trade at a medium to long distance with your opponent, and then as soon as you have their health down low enough where you are able to consistently kill them in close quarters combat, you break into close quarters combat, or you force them to go into close quarters combat by going on cap. Speaking of going on cap, there is a lot of things that I can talk about capping in 1v1s, so let's talk about how to cap correctly. When you decide to capture the enemy base, you should already be certain that you have the ability to kill the opponent in a head-to-head fight. This is because capping the base will force the opponent to you, but in exchange you will most likely be giving the opponent the most favorable position. You are giving them all the control. They know exactly where you are, and you don't know for sure where they are. When you start capping, you need to ensure that the opponent is an easy, or at least consistent, kill for you. Then you need to ensure that your opponent cannot reset you without exposing themselves for being shot at in return, or enabling you to easily chase them down. This usually means getting solid cover, which is typically plentiful in tournament maps, but again, not always. Now, the harder part is resetting the cap. If the opponent is competent, they'll be following the rule of capping that they are able to win in a flat-out battle against you. If that's the case, you need to shoot them without getting hit in return. The easiest way to do this is to approach from a side the enemy doesn't expect. This is why it's important to cap while mitigating the ways your opponent can approach you, by the way. There are a lot of ways to reset the cap without getting hit in return. Some are as simple as going to a position where you can't get penetrated and then shooting them once and then pulling back. But there are also some mind game versions of it that you can do as long as you have a little bit of mobility. First, you can poke one side and then leave after going unspotted. As soon as the enemy is unspotted, you know that you are unspotted. Wait at the corner that you were spotted at until the enemy goes unspotted so you know you are unspotted, then turn around and go poke from another direction. A lot of people know this one. But what's really important about doing this trick is that you cannot do it more than twice in a row without the opponent starting to understand it. I usually do it only once. There is another trick that makes it so that you can easily repeat this, which is as simple as go unspotted, make it look like you're about to fake out going the opposite direction, and then wait a little while so that the enemy starts looking the opposite direction of where you are, and then poke the exact same corner where you stayed. This works really well in these 1v1 tournaments because they're not really dependent upon skill, so a lot of people don't really think too hard about whether or not you're faking them out double. There's also a really sneaky one where you can make it look like you've made a mistake with your moving at times. So for example, you can wait a little while and then before you go unspotted, you start going the opposite direction to make it look like you're about to go to the other side and then come back. It makes it look like you were thinking about it, but you got the timing wrong or something, so they're like, oh, I'm gonna get him this time. And then you do the exact same thing. It's important that you keep the cap timer in context for all of these strategies. After all, it's a total waste if you can't hit your opponent before the cap finishes. To play safely, you can always reset once with HE prior to doing your fake out. Once you've damaged your opponent on cap enough, it's as easy as pushing them and forcing a head-to-head fight, which brings me to the final section. Now we're going to talk about another very complicated part, which is how to win in close quarters. There's a very simple way of thinking about it that will make it very straightforward for you. Is a face hug better for you or for them? If it's better for them, don't face hug. Drive around the side and shoot them in the side. If it's better for you, then face hug. For example, there are a lot of tanks that are really good in face hugging. One that I didn't expect was the UDES 1516. A chieftain cannot pen the UDES 1516 in a face hug. I did not know that. There are other tanks that are really bad in a face hug. For example, the Object 279E is terrible on a face hug. You can pen the upper plate as long as you're very close to it. The IS-7 is another one that's very bad in a face hug. An Object 430U will outtrade an IS-7 in a face hug all of the time. It's ridiculous. Do not play an IS-7 in this. It's really important to try to get a general understanding of whether or not you're going to be better in the head-to-head than they are. For example, a Super Conqueror is better in a head-to-head against some tanks, but two Super Conquerors face-hugging each other can easily pen each other very consistently. So you have to keep that in mind. There are also some other tanks that are a little bit between heavy and medium, like again, the Object 430U. If there is an enemy tank that's going to be better in a face-hug than the Object 430U, then don't face-hug them. You really have to make that call yourself. Again, I can't go through every single tank that plays against each other. Just try to consider whether or not it's going to be a better idea for you or a better idea for them. If you do end up going for the face hug, it's as simple as making sure that you are constantly staying in their face and shooting at the appropriate times. If the enemy tank has a pike nose, like, again, I keep bringing it up, the IS-7, then make sure that before you take your shot, you angle yourself backwards and to the side a little bit so you can shoot down into their pike face. If you're playing against something that you cannot actually pen in a face hug, then you want to do the exact same thing. You want to make sure that you're only firing when you see that green. A good way to do that is to wiggle a little bit so that you can get to their side, and as soon as you get a side shot, you take that side shot. If you are not face hugging the opponent, then you want to make sure that every single time you are firing, you are penning your shots. I mean, that's obvious, but every time you're firing, you want to pen your shots, but also you really want to aim for drive wheels. If you hit an opponent's drive wheel in a 1v1, they have two options. One is they risk that you're going to be able to completely make a fool out of them by continuing to circle them and keep them permatracked. Or two, they use their repair kit on the track. While that is normally a good idea, because again, the other option is to get embarrassed, at the same time, in 1v1s, you'd be amazed how many times you get set on fire in Amaranth. If you don't have a repair kit, it's gonna suck for you. So going for the drive wheels, not only does it immobilize the opponent, it also forces them to waste your repair kit, which is really your lifeline in 1v1s against RNG. Alright, so now that we talked about all that, I know that I didn't really cover all of the different aspects of 1v1s, which is why we're going to go into the different examples right after this. I'm going to talk through as many of them as I can, just so you guys can see what my mindset is for every single 1v1. Hopefully these will help. Alright, so to start us off, we're going to be playing a game between the Concept 1B and the enemy AE Phase 1. Now, first things first, the AE Phase 1 is technically better than a Concept 1B in trading shot for shot, just because the Concept 1B's upper turret can be penned more consistently than the Concept 1B can pen the AE Phase 1. Now, with that in mind, I was planning, initially, to take the side here and counter the AE Phase 1, who I thought would be playing more towards the center factory. Unfortunately, I was incorrect. Now I make mistake number 1, which is side-scraping off of the first part. Now, what's very important here is that I know that the AE just shot me, and I now get a free shot in return. So it's very important that you notice that when I was taking that shot there, I did not rush the shot to hit his lower plate right away, even though I had the full shot on the lower plate. I realized that I had time, so it was better to take my time. Now, what I'm doing here is I realized that I'm not going to be able to outtrade this AE Phase 1, so what I was waiting for is for him to take another shot on me side-scraping. This time I did not go for the shot in return because I knew it would be a waste with him playing that ridge, and all I wanted to do was bait him into giving me a shot into the side so that I could disengage when I wanted to. So now that I'm able to disengage and I know where he is, I can try to get a better angle to start fighting him. And at this point, I was still hoping that I would be able to outtrade him shot for shot. So what I end up doing is trying to get another hold down to counteract the fact that he is hold down. and make it a hold-down fight. But as soon as that happens, I realize that it's a waste of time. Now we're going to ignore the fact that I'm driving like an absolute idiot here while I get into position. And again, the A Phase 1 is technically better at this range than the Concept 1B. The Concept 1B does have a decent advantage at close range. Alright, so what I'm going to do here is nothing really happens for a while, so I'm going to fast forward through this part. So I do get back to the hold down, hoping that he would be pre-aiming the opposite direction after I do a little fake out there. It does end up working. Unfortunately, I'm not able to get the one free shot in. Now what I'm hoping to do is for him to overexpose so that I can get one shot in. The person who is sitting still and pre-aiming at the other tank that is poking is going to have the advantage in a 50-50 fight, just because by staying still, you are the one that's going to be able to fully aim your shot. So you can see there, because the AA Phase 1 was the one poking there, I was the one at greater risk for trying to side script against it. Now at this point, I'm starting to realize this is not a trade that I'm going to be able to win. After all, the AA Phase 1 is going to be able to outtrade the Concept 1B more consistently at that range. So what I decide to do instead is I drive straight towards the cap circle. And I didn't even bother trying to fake him out here because I knew I didn't really need any extra time in order to get there, because the AE Phase 1 is not nearly as fast as the Concept 1B. Now, once I get onto the cap circle here, I have a couple options of which way to look. I can either turn and face the left side and guess he's going to come from there, which is more likely, or I can look towards the right. And originally I was looking towards the left because I figured that would be the most likely position for him to come from. But what I figure out I can do instead is I can just pre-aim on the side that's least likely while making sure I'm keeping an eye on the other side. That way, if he comes out from that side, which he did, I can move forwards, get into cover, and then turn and face him. Now, while he's approaching me, I realize that I have the advantage because he's more in the open than I do, so I want to put in a shot right off the bat. And now at this point, if I was being a little bit smarter, what I would be doing is pushing him. Instead, what I do is continue to try trading with him, which is stupid. Again, I have the ability to win in a 50-50 fight here. Now I finally realize that, so I decide to go shot for shot. I put one shot in, and now I just realize all I have to do is take my time and out-trade him in a face hug. Unfortunately, I'm an idiot, and managed to shoot his gun. So now he has the advantage in the 50-50 fight, and now at this point I was cursing myself for being stupid and not taking my time. I get one more shot in, and at this point I realize that the face hug is not going to work. He's going to pen me, so I have to try to make sure that I delay as long as possible for his shot to come in. He ends up actually missing there, and I managed to get the kill. I really fucked up in that game. I should have taken a lot more time getting the second shot in during the face hug. It was stupid of me to not take my time. I also should have rushed in the beginning, but that's the glory of hindsight. As soon as you're able to win the 50-50, you put pressure on. Now what we're going to do is look at a battle between two S-Conks. And in 1v1s, I've noticed that more recently especially, players are not as statistically advanced as they were previously. In fact, out of 3 weeks of playing tournaments, this was the best player that I managed to face off against stat-wise. So I figured I would include this battle to show you that you'll see. So again, the two main steps of playing in fights. The first step is to lower your opponent's health so that you are at the point where you can win in a fight that's trading shot for shot. The first step is always the hardest part because you have to hit them for free without them being able to hit you. If I'm playing against an enemy S-Conk and I'm in an S-Conk, the first person to get the shot off is going to win. Especially if you assume that both of us are using hardening to increase our health that extra 300. I am in fact doing that. He ends up not doing that, which is actually the reason he loses. Now, off the bat, I'm waiting until he gets on the cap circle because now I know exactly where he is. And at this point, I was getting ready to get the one free shot in. I should not have fired there. The reason for that is if I had taken my time a little bit longer, though he would have turned his turret towards me, because I'm above him, it would have been better to shoot after I'd taken as much time as possible. However, now that he's fired, I want to close the distance because I'm noticing that he does not have hardening, and I want to make sure that I'm in a position to better counter him. Now I realize that he bounced and he fired right after me, and because we have the exact same gun, I can take my time and put a shot in. Now, for the beginning here, I'm trying to side scrape. I do not need to do this. There are a couple reasons for this. One, I'm on the high ground because I positioned myself higher up than he is, which means that I have full control over this combat. Another thing, he does not have hardening. And third, I am firing before he is, which means that in this 50-50 fight, I will constantly be the victor, just because he physically cannot kill me faster than I can kill him. So after a little while, I totaled it up in my head, and I realized this, so I'm just relaxing and sitting in front of him. I don't care if he shoots me. I've got a repair kit. I can always repair my Emmerich if that ends up happening. It doesn't. I can take my time and finish him off. And I have 1 shot of health left, which is exactly what I was expecting, because we are both using the exact same kind of gun. And he actually got pretty lucky there, because I low-rolled off of him multiple times. He should have died a shell earlier. Now we're going to go on to game number 3, which is in a tank that I highly recommend not using in tournaments, which is the IS-2M. The reason I'm using this is because at the time it was the only tier 7 heavy tank that I had available, so I decided to mess around with it a little bit. And I was playing some pretty shitty tanks for the sake of getting footage for this video. Now, the IS-2M, against the Tiger 1, which is what the enemy is using, has very few advantages. One of the advantages is armor, but that doesn't really matter too much when everybody's firing gold. But the advantage that I really want to take advantage of, is the fact that I'm doing far more damage per shot than the enemy Tiger is. What that means is that though he's going to have better DPM than me, I am going to be able to trade shot for shot better than he does. So what I want to do is get to a corner as quickly as possible, and then poke out, put 1 shot in, take 1 shot in return, and keep doing that over and over again. I'm totally fine if he pens me here, because I will do more damage to him than he does to me. Unfortunately, I low roll, but he bounces anyway, so it's okay. And now at this point, he is pushing me. Because he's driving out, I realize that me sitting still is going to have way more accuracy than a Tiger that is pushing out like this. Now that he's in position there, I realize that I can just side scrape. I do get pretty lucky by being able to hit that shot. As soon as I put the shot in, there's no reason for me to keep side scraping here. A lot of players, after they put the shot in, will continue side scraping against the Tiger and then prep for their next shot. There is absolutely no reason for me to do that. I am freely able to disengage. There's no pressure on me doing damage right now because I'm way ahead of him on health. I fake out going one way until I'm unspotted and then pressure the other way. Now he's prepped to look over the other direction. So all I have to do is go over to him without getting in close range to get proxy spotted. He's not looking the correct direction. I get another free shell in. At this point, he starts panicking a little bit. He's trying to get a shot on me before I can reload. He doesn't manage to do so. At this point, I decided to kind of challenge myself a little bit. I very clearly have the win at this point. I really wanted to get the win without taking any damage whatsoever. In this scenario, if you had this much of a health advantage, it is as simple to win as literally just pressing W. He physically cannot kill me before I kill him. I have enough time to fire 4 shots before he kills me. But I get a little selfish. I really wanted to get the perfect game here. So what I really want you guys, while I mess around a little bit, there's not really anything else that's important that's going to happen in this game. What I really want you guys to take away is that there is a golden rule for fighting opponents, which we saw in the first game as well, which is whatever tank is sitting still is going to be winning the 50-50 fight. If you can catch your opponent out when they're switching positions or when they're pushing after you, that is when you get your counteracting damage in. That is why if you lose the initial trade and you're heavy, as long as you maintain a decent distance, you still have a chance to win, as long as you punish them as they're coming after you. And there we go. I finished the Tiger 1 off. It was a very, very easy fight, simply because I caught him out while he was moving, meaning I could take my time and put in as many shots as I wanted to, and then a little bit of a fake out later on in the game by going one direction and then switching at the end. Now we're going to go to another game, which is me fucking up. That seems to be a pretty consistent theme here, but that's the reason these games are all very close. Now I'm in the Comet against an FV201 A45. The FV is very good in 1v1 tournaments and very bad at literally everything else. The Comet, however, is not a very great choice for 1v1 tournaments. In fact, the only time I would really take the Comet is if you don't have any other options, which coincidentally is why I'm in the Comet right now. I didn't have any other options at the time. In order to counter an FV201 in a Comet, the trick is to maintain a distance. However, I miscalculated, and the FV201 came after me right off the bat. Now, at this point, there's no way I'm going to win a DPM fight. There's absolutely no way I'm going to beat an FV201 at close range by shooting as many times as he shoots me, just because of how much extra health he has. So I realized the only way for me to get out of this situation is to track him as many times as physically possible. I want to get 2 tracks in a row so that he's permatracked so that I can take my time finishing him off. I already get him tracked once, which means he's burned 1 repair kit. I'm trying to shoot at the same track over and over again. Of course, it's not always possible. Now, at this point, I'm watching the critical damage notification at the bottom, meaning that I'm checking exactly how many times I'm shooting each track, so I know that both tracks are critically damaged. Now what I want to do is track him right when he comes over the ridgeline. This guy is not an idiot. He knows that's what I want to do, because that is the only physical way I can win. I'm a one-shot for him. He doesn't want to take the bait, though, so what I try to do is I drive straight away. By driving straight away, he thinks that I'm going to be running away, and I'm giving him a very tempting target. In fact, by backing away from the enemy tank, they realize that they have to punish you while you're running away. However, that was tasty enough bait to force him to come after me. So even though I fucked up really hard in the initial positioning, I did not expect the FV201 to beat me to that ridgeline, or at least tie me to that ridgeline. I was able to counteract it by continuing to shoot the track. If it is a fair DPM fight and you can win by penning every shot, it is less important to shoot for the tracks as much as I did in that situation. But because it was an FV201 and it has the same gun but with more health, I realized that I really had to make sure that I was getting the permatrack in, because that was the only way I was going to be able to win there. Alright, so I think we've demonstrated me being an idiot enough times. So instead I'm going to show you guys one game that is going to be fairly boring to watch, but it should allow everybody to see what the ideal situation for a tournament should be. Now, with picking the tank, again, I picked the Concept 1B. It's my favorite tier 9 to do 1v1s in, just because of the mobility. Even though the AE Phase 1 is, again, better at trading, shot for shot. But the enemy player brings a Conqueror. A Conqueror is a terrifying tank. It's got amazing damage per minute, it's got a great gun, it's got good gun depression, it's got pretty decent turret armor. Here's the thing. The turret armor is not perfect. That is the primary difference between the AE Phase 1 and the Conqueror. The Conqueror is not impenetrable. It is impossible to put the Conqueror in a spot in a 1v1 unless you are incredibly lucky. It is impossible to put a Conqueror in a 1v1 position where you are impenetrable to whatever is shooting at you. I have heat chills, and I am pre-aiming at this corner. There is no possible way I'm going to lose this trade against the enemy Conqueror here. What he should be doing, and I hate to coach somebody else, but what he should be doing in this situation, because I'm so easily pre-aimed on his corner, every time he's disengaging like that and disappearing after a short amount of time, all I'm doing is chilling there, because I realize that it's going to take quite a long time for him to go anywhere anyway, so I'm not in any rush to worry about him switching positions. Instead, I can just take my time and pre-aim at the corner. What he needs to do is pick a different spot. The fact that I know where he is right now and can trade shot for shot against him on this corner means that he is never going to win this fight. There is no way that this Conqueror is going to outtrade the Concept 1B when they're both hull down. All I have to do is shoot his cupola over and over again. Because I'm angling my tank upwards ever so slightly, he can't shoot my cupola all that easily. I can just take as much time as I want. So I've put in 2 shots already. At this point, if I wanted to, I could disengage and go from a different angle. However, what I want to do is make sure that he is disengaging from that corner before I make a move. If he's trying to bait me forwards, which he was, then I would have been in trouble if he caught me out while I was approaching. So what I want to do is wait until either he leaves that corner or until he gets so scared that he does not want to shoot me while I'm approaching. And again, the reason that I'm winning this trade is because, one, my tank is better in this situation than his is, but also because I am pre-aiming while he is coming to me. The tank that is pre-aiming has the advantage in the shot-for-shot fight. Now, at this point, I realize that he might have been pretty scared here, seeing as I have way more health than he does. So what I want to do is make sure that I'm getting close to him without giving him the opportunity to counter me while I'm crossing, like what happened to the Tiger in the last game. So what I do is I very carefully skirt around the cap circle until I am too close for him to physically counter. He puts 1 shot in. Unfortunately for him, it does not penetrate. And at this point, he's completely screwed. He brought the small gun to make sure that he can win in a DPM fight. He was really banking on getting close to the opponent early on. I didn't have to worry about that because I had plenty of time to maintain distance and trade shot for shot. As soon as I realized he had the small gun, the threat went down even more, because the shot for shot fight is very easily won by the tank that has more penetration and more damage per shot. Holy crap, that is a long video. I do apologize, guys, for taking so long to make this video, as well as for taking so long to watch it, if you've seen the entire thing. But yeah, I don't really have anything to say for the conclusion. I've already said everything that I wanted to say. I wish you guys the best of luck with your tournaments and free gold making. And yeah, happy tanking.